The Dorian mode has a smooth, mellow sound. Despite its minor nature, it's not as heavy or sad as the Aeolian mode. For this reason, it is used widely in pop and rock to represent emotions that are somewhere between the happy major scale and the sad minor scale. Listen to how it sounds here with the A Dorian scale. And here are the chords that are found in the A Dorian key, with the scale notes that go into each chord. A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, and G major. These are the diatonic chords in the A Dorian key. That is chords that are made purely with notes from the A Dorian scale. A Dorian is a good key for guitar players because it has lots of chords that can be played as simple open chords. Another useful key for guitarists is D Dorian. You can see that each of the diatonic chords has a Roman numeral above it. Lowercase indicates minor chords and uppercase major chords. This helps you to understand chord progressions, as the Roman numerals can apply to any Dorian key and simply indicate the function of the chords. Let's start building some Dorian mode chord progressions now and look at how you can write your own. The easiest starting point for Dorian key progressions is to alternate between the 1 chord and the 4 chord. You may be familiar with this sound. It was used extensively by Pink Floyd amongst other artists. This progression works well because it contrasts minor and major chords. The 1 chord A minor anchors us in the mode with a minor sound from the flat 3rd note, but we could still be in the natural minor key / Aeolian mode. When we move to the major 4 chord D major, it introduces an unexpected brightness. It lifts us up from the expected 4 minor chord to the 4 major chord. The 1 and 4 chords are great scaffolding to build out your Dorian key progressions from. The contrast between the minor tonic chord 1 and the major chords 3, 4 and 7 features heavily in the most popular Dorian chord progressions. In the next example, I'll play these chords in various positions to flesh out our chord progression and give you an idea of how they sound and function. It's worth comparing the chords in A Dorian to the chords in A natural minor / Aeolian. The points of difference here are the 2 chord, 4 chord and the 6 chord. This suggests we're going to need these chords somewhere in our progressions to clearly signpost that we are using a Dorian key. With that in mind, I'll now bring in the minor 2 chord into the progressions. Listen to how it works with the various other chords. You will have heard in the previous progression that when the chords are in Roman numeral order, they create a rising or falling feeling, called an escalator effect. Always be aware of this in your progressions, and utilise it if you want to build up to a section or create movement. The last remaining minor chord is 5. As highlighted earlier, this is the same in minor / Aeolian keys as it is in Dorian, so be mindful of what chords you pair it with if you want to be truly Dorian. Let's look at a few examples now. When writing your own progressions, experiment with where the chords feature, particularly the one tonic chord. You may have noticed in the previous example that one part of the progression didn't start on the one chord like the others, and therefore stood out. The one chord is your home base. As such, it is safe and not threatening. Consider holding the one chord back in certain sections to build up tension and generate interest. When the one chord is finally brought back, the feeling of home is even stronger. You may have noticed that we have been avoiding one of the chords so far, 6. This is because it is a diminished chord. Diminished chords have a strong dissonant sound which many songwriters seek to avoid. They can also be difficult to play on the guitar. I don't think you should avoid them completely, and they are at least worth experimenting with in your Dorian progressions. Listen to the effect they bring in this progression. Songwriters will often swap the diminished chord for a major triad and then use that in its place. To do this, you drop the diminished chord's root note by half a step and then build a major triad from this new root. So for example, in A Dorian, we take F sharp diminished, drop its root note to F, and then use that to make an F major triad. We label this chord flat 6. You could also think of this chord as being borrowed from the Aeolian, Locrian, or Phrygian keys. Let's use this in a progression now. Have a listen to how the chord sounds with the other chords around it. The second 4-bar sequence has a rising feeling, and then look out for the use of the diminished 6 chord next to the flat 6 in a descending progression after this. I referred to this flat 6 chord as a borrowed chord because it has been borrowed from another key and then used in the key of our progression. Another term that applies here is modal mixture or modal interchange. This is when you take a chord from a parallel key and use it in your progression. You can usually feel and hear when this has happened, as there is a sense that something has changed. This is only a brief change, too short to call it a modulation or a key change. We then go back to diatonic chords from the key. A parallel key is any which has the same root or tonic note. For example, we're using A Dorian, so parallel keys would include A major, A mixolydian, A Phrygian, etc. They don't have to be modes of the major scale, so you can also reach out to more exotic keys like harmonic minor or Phrygian dominant. Any chords that you like from the parallel key can be used, although you will see some used more commonly than others. This is a hugely powerful technique for your chord progressions and songs. The potential options for borrowed chords is huge, providing you with almost infinite ways to colour and shape your chord progressions. My recommendation when dipping your toe into these waters is to build up a Dorian scaffold in your song first to establish the tonal centre. As we saw, this would focus on chords 1, 2, 4 and 6, then bring in your borrowed chord for a short time before moving back to diatonic chords. Let's look at a few examples. The first borrowed chord is a flat 2. This has come from the A Locrian key. Then we'll listen to a sharp 3 from the A Lydian key. Listen to how it sounds after the standard 3 chord. Finally, we have a major 2 chord, again from the A Lydian key. Listen to how these chords colour the progression, but it doesn't sound out of key or completely discordant. You can see that the creative options you have with this idea are almost limitless. I'll demonstrate a few more here by reaching out to more exotic scales. The first chord is the 3 chord from the A harmonic minor key. You'll see that it has a plus sign next to it. This is an augmented chord which has an uncomfortable tension. They are neither major nor minor and have a strange awkwardness. The Phrygian dominant scale is a mode of the harmonic minor. You may know it as the Andalusian scale, where the well-known Andalusian cadence comes from. This uses another augmented chord, this time as the 6 chord. When we use this in our Dorian key song, it becomes a flat 6 augmented chord, in this case F augmented. You will have noticed that so far I've only focused on basic triads, major, minor and diminished. But there's a world of chord types out there for you to try in your Dorian chord progressions. I'll run through a few ideas now, but please note that this is by no means exhaustive. As with everything, I recommend experimenting with chord types and find the ones that you like the sound of. Let's start with a couple of these basic 2-chord progressions. I'll play the minor chords as minor sevenths and the major 4 chord as a dominant ninth. Listen to the jazzy smooth feel this provides here. Other chords that can emphasise the Dorian sound are 7 major 7th and 5 minor 9th. You can also utilise add chords to create different sounds with more guitar friendly chords. Another popular chord type to use in Dorian keys is sus4. Sus chords are widely used in popular music because they are very versatile. Sus4 chords have a focused tension that guitarists will often use because of accessible open chords. Next I'll use sus4 chords as 3 of the diatonic chords in our A Dorian key. A simple move from 1 to 1 sus4 provides a real sense of drama. Another popular Dorian method is ending your chord progressions with the 4 sus4 to 4 change, which can add some uplifting brightness. I've also included a 5 dominant 7th chord here. This is a borrowed 5 chord, an example of modal mixture that we discussed earlier. The dominant 7th 5 chord is very common in major and minor keys to provide a strong drawback to the tonic 1 chord. Listen to how it sounds here after the 5 sus4 chord. By this stage you should have some ideas of the chords you want to use and maybe even the structure of a chord progression. This is more than enough to create interesting progressions that you can build up into songs. But there is a bit more finessing that we can do. You may have noticed that every progression has so far been using 1 chord per bar. This is not typical for a whole song, as it becomes quite predictable. Chords can be played for as long or as short as you like. You can mix them up to create rhythmic, riff-like sequences. In a band setting, you might also have to consider what other instruments are playing and how your chord progression will complement them. Maybe there's a rhythm that runs through your song, and your chord progressions match this. I know I sound like a broken record at this stage, but experiment with chord durations in your own progressions and see how it can shape the sound of your songs. Another thing to consider is chord voicings. You may have never considered this before, but it can have a big impact on your chord progressions. This is often true of guitar players who will learn a chord in one position and then always revert back to this when required. This comes down to how the notes in chords move from one chord to the next. This is also known as voice leading. Although technically the same notes are being heard, the arrangement of them impacts upon the sound of the progression. The best way I can demonstrate this is with an example. Take this progression I played earlier. Here it is with the most common open chords on guitar. There's nothing wrong with this, providing a gentle rising up feeling, but what if we thought about the movement of notes and go after a particular sound? For example, we could attempt a descending downward feeling to the progression. This involves playing the chords in different positions on the guitar and also utilising inverted chords. Chord inversions are great for creating these sorts of effects. Look at the intro to Stairway to Heaven for a similar idea. I'll now put some of what we've discussed into a full song example. There are a few things to note before we begin. The verse is played partly as arpeggios, that is chords where the notes are played individually. This is a really common thing to do on guitar. I play the 6th chord as a minor 7th flat 5. This can make the chord a bit easier to play on guitar. It's also known as a half diminished chord. In the chorus, an interesting chord is played after the E minor 7. It is a G add 9 with an E bass. This can be written as a slash chord like this, G add 9/E. In the bridge I use all 5th or power chords. Again, you'll be familiar with this if you play the guitar and like distortion. Look at how my choice of chords, voicings, durations and effects all play a part in shaping the sound of the song. Listen along, see if you can spot things we've discussed, and try and write your own Dorian chord progressions. You've learned about chord progressions, but there's a wide world of the Dorian mode out there. I've made a playlist just for you, so make sure you watch that next and improve your Dorian mode knowledge today.